Welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up,
our Christian parenting Q&A podcast, and we're your hosts.
I'm Israel Wayne.
And I'm Brook Wayne.
Welcome to another episode of our podcast where Brooke and I are going to be talking about family discipleship and parenting. We have some listener questions, and so we're going to dive into those, and we're going to try to give you some helpful advice, hopefully, on some things that have been pressing questions that some of you have been wrestling with. Brooke, what is our first question?
Well, the first question was, how can mothers, in particular mothers, be nurturing their relationship with their sons? And this is a difficult challenge, right? I think sometimes mothers can connect with their daughters in a very easygoing way. They may have more similar pastimes and hobbies, so that connection can be easier. But mothers to sons, I think sometimes is a bit of a challenge. So for us, we have 5 sons. Now, 4 are closer in age, 16 to 25. And then our little guy is 6 years old. And so that's been interesting, like having those older ones lumped together has brought a lot of challenges and enjoyment and exhortation for me as a mom with sons. Keeping that connection, you know, when they're younger, it's so much easier, just so much easier. I used to love taking our one son out fishing. And nobody in our family fishes except for Israel's grandfather. And so it was one of those things, like I would have the opportunity to take him to learn to enjoy something he liked doing. And I don't touch worms and don't have a fishing license. So I would pack up the little ones and take a snack, and it would be often cold. So I'd be taking them down to the river at that time and let them stay in the car while I let my one son fish. That built a connection that was really sweet. I loved that. Another time we had a room that needed all the walls taken out. That was when our oldest was 15. And so we took out all the walls, and I noted something about how beneficial a demolition project can be for a son. And so we tried to do that when Israel was needing to work, but it was like a good time for my one son and I to connect and be able to enjoy some things. I think, though, one of the things that your mom recognized with you that you passed on to me has been the most beneficial for me as a mom with teenage boys is that when a son gets to be 13, 12, somewhere in that range, they really need to take on a man's responsibility. They don't want to be told by their mom what to do every single minute. And as I had the older boys, it was challenging not to just be like, here's my list, here's my desires for your life. You will fulfill all the things I've told you to do. What made that challenging, though, is I had to relinquish some of that, recognizing how Israel benefited as a young person from his mother just giving him responsibility, like, here's the yard work. You're in charge of the yard work now. Probably gave you some guidelines, I'm sure, but I had to take that a little bit to just finding out how can I make those kinds of responsibility delegations for my older sons and give them that responsibility without micromanaging them. So I'm sure I failed a lot that, yet it also helped a lot to have that mindset. And I started looking for ways to find, whether it was yard work or some project, something that I could relinquish a little control and say, you need to take responsibility. You find out how to buy the project, all the project materials, how to get from point A to point B, how to maximize this opportunity, how to set up even a fun project like we're going to rent canoes, and you need to take the day to figure out how to make that all happen for the family. So obviously there were times I'd have to say, well, no, you can't just ignore the lawn. You have to actually do it. There's some of that. But I found that was super helpful in my stepping back from the mommy figure, trying to make sure they did all the things I wanted, exactly so, but also then putting that weight of responsibility in their hands. And they've grown, and it's exciting watching the 2 older ones working full time, planning camping trips and canoe trips and all that themselves, and figuring out how to do the cooking. Like, that's been exciting for this to watch them do all these things that I taught them to do, led them doing, allowed them to do, and they're doing it on their own. So that's been exciting. But nurturing them, I think, comes a lot down to showing a respect for their growing manhood in a way that's very different, of course, than how we would treat our girls. But being able to see in them the growing man that needs to take over things. And like Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to destroy and a time to build up, and zeroing in on those conversations with them about when to destroy and when to build up has been helpful.
In my situation, I was raised in my older years by a single parent mother. So I think for a lot of people who are in that situation, of course, being a single parent, I think is the toughest job in the world.
Yeah.
But my mother had to kind of fill both roles of being the nurturing parent, but also the disciplinarian.
Right.
And that's very challenging because, moms oftentimes will be imbalanced if they're trying to do both. They'll either be, too difficult or too overbearing with the children, or they will be too lax. And it's hard to do both.
Yeah.
And so I remember, one of the things about young men, I guess, that I would say that you have to keep in mind, especially if you're a mom, is that somewhere in those early tweener years, as they're approaching puberty, 11, 12, 13, somewhere in those ages, a young man will start pushing back against his mom because he is becoming a man. And that's not bad. It's not a bad thing that he is feeling this sense of chafing, I guess, a little bit against his mom's authority. But practically, functionally, it can be a real challenge.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that my mom said to me when I was probably 13 years old is she had a sit down with me and she said, you are becoming a man, and there's this God-given call that you feel inside of you for dominion. And God has hardwired you for that. And it's something that God wants you to do. He's wired you to take dominion over the earth and subdue it. And so you're feeling that increasingly in your life. And she said that the struggle or the problem that you're having is you don't quite understand proper jurisdiction and you don't understand the limits of your dominion. So she said, so I think what we have to do right now is we have to ask ourselves, what is your domain? Like, right? Because you take dominion over your domain.
Yeah.
And so what is your domain? She said, well, the problem that we're having is that the things that are your domain, you're not really being responsible for. And the things that
like
are
your
not,
bedroom.
the things that are not your domain, you're being overbearing in. So she said, for example, your bedroom, your schoolwork, the lawn, these are things that are your responsibilities. They are your domain.
Right.
And almost everything that is clearly your domain, you're being negligent. But then things that are not your domain, you're trying to take control over and subdue. And she said, so let's try to make this clear. Like, I am not your domain and your sisters are not your domain. Someday God will give you, when you're an adult, will give you your own house, your own possibly business. You'll have your own children that you're responsible for. You're going to have your own responsibilities, but you are every day becoming the person that you're going to be.
Right.
And right now, you're not showing faithfulness in the little things. And those who are showing faithfulness in the small things they'll be given stewardship over greater things. So right now, you need to look at the things that are your domain and make sure that you are showing full responsibility for those things. And so I felt like that was just a very wise way for her to respect me as a man and who I was becoming, but also to have proper boundaries as a mom, to not allow her son to rule over her because that wasn't my place.
Right.
Now,
and sons, they sure seem to, like 12, 13, 14, they're really wanting to take over their mothers.
Yeah. So as a father, in our marriage relationship, we've had that with some of our boys, and they become teenagers, that they really push back against their mom. They become disrespectful. They don't want to do the things that she's asking them to do. And so as a father in that situation, I have to step in and provide a firewall, if you will, to protect my wife from them trying to rule over her, if you will, in terms of the authority structure. And so in a situation where there is a dad in the home and where you have a fully functioning family, it really is dad's responsibility to make sure that the mother is able to be in a position of authority and that she's got backup. With her husband, and husbands have a responsibility to, I would say, protect their wife from their sons being disrespectful and pushing back against their authority. But in the situation with a single parent where you don't have that backup, you have to, as a single parent mom, have respect and understanding of your own boundaries, and don't allow your sons to cross that. And I know that's a challenge. It's very difficult, but I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge in that area. You know, again, like 13 to 15 for boys, older sometimes too, but it's easy for a mom to want to engage every conversation that their son brings up. And he's trying to find his place perhaps and trying to say, oh, look, I'm a young man. I don't want to be told every little thing anymore. And, maybe that needs some changing. And yet there's a lot of tendency towards getting into arguing. And I think that's one line I really try to hold when it's those difficult moments of the young teen, is not to fall into a trap of arguing and yes, no. And it's like these young men thrive on that argumentative attitude. And yet, for me, thankfully, having your kind of guardianship over me to be able to be like, I have a backup, but I do feel for the moms who are not in that situation. Or, at times you're at work or you're on a work trip. And so I have to be able to manage. We're not going to just fall into a trap. I'm not going to fall into a trap of just arguing all day.
Well, and I like to say too, you have dads who are disrespectful to their wives, husbands.
Yes,
and
that's
if a
terrible.
husband is disrespectful to his wife, then the teen sons will automatically be disrespectful to mom.
Doing that.
So that becomes a very difficult challenge too. And in those cases, the mom has to stand up for herself. If her husband is not, she has to have proper boundaries and just not accept that to the best of her ability, so that she holds a position of authority and just doesn't tolerate that, again, as much as possible to the best of her ability.
So a couple of things I think I've done, categorizing them is taking what your mom said of what is your domain, working them back to who is an authority. And I don't do it in a heavy-handed way to say, I'm your mom and you'll have to listen to me. But just saying, no, this is the area I'll have to decide. But if they have a good idea about a better way to do something, or, they'd like to change the plan a little bit. We had one, for instance, that wanted to do physics instead of chemistry. And so we looked into those details. I definitely will let them know, I hear what you're saying, and I'll take that into consideration. Sometimes to corral something from being argumentative, I'll say, I need more time to think about that. I've heard what you've had to say. Let me get back with you, and I'll try to get back to the next day or something. Because these young men have a lot of hormones that are very high at a moment, and I need to just say, let's tone this conversation down. Give me time to think about it, and I'll get back with you. And oftentimes the next day it's a moot point. It's not even a big deal. So that helps a lot. Just finding ways for moms maybe to handle that somewhat graciously and not allowing themselves to be bullied over with their sons who are wanting to just take dominion over everything, especially their moms. And then, always going back and providing these young people with the reasons why we do things. It's really easy for a mom with a son in particular to say, you're going to do this because I said so. We want to pull rank and be like, I told you you're going to have to do this. Yet at those ages, especially as again, the older teens, we want to be providing our biblical foundation of this is why our family has chosen this. I'm not budging on why our family chose this or that this is the standard or whatnot, but providing them more backup and books. This is where I really like to turn over to our sons and say, here's a good book on the subject. This one really, answered some good questions for me on that topic. And so we'll give them those sorts of things. And then finally, I think a tired young man is a much happier young man. I think the scripture says something in Proverbs, doesn't it, about just like when you're tired from your work.
Well, there's that also where it talks about how it's good for a young man to bear the yoke in his youth.
I think that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so it's good for him to have a little weight in his hands, to have some responsibility, to have some labor. That's difficult as we've moved into more suburban and urban living environments where you don't have as much natural application for physical labor. But it's good for a young man to work. And
it really is.
If there's not enough to do in the home, finding service projects and things like that can be really helpful.
It is. Just having them be a little bit worn out sometimes helps them be able to move on. And so we had another question, and this one I'd like to ask you to answer, is what can a family do when they have a child who wants to be enrolled in public school sports? And maybe they even have a propensity in a particular sport, let's say team sport. What should happen in that family? What are some dynamics that they can do? Should they get enrolled in the public school, even if it's just the sports aspect?
Well, we're assuming these people are homeschoolers, I guess, and that they want to be able to opt in to just the public school sports part of it. Every state is different regarding the legality of this, and so that makes it a little tricky to discuss. There are sports that do allow public school access, and then there are sports that don't, states that do not. And so in the states that do not, oftentimes there's a push from families who want to opt in. For example, I'm on the board of the Michigan State Homeschool Association. In our state in Michigan, we do not have equal access for homeschoolers to play public school sports. And our state homeschool association has never encouraged homeschoolers to push for that. We have actually, as an organization, written some position papers of why we think parents need to think twice about that. I also have written a book called Answers for Homeschooling, the top 25 questions critics ask, and one of the chapters in that book is called What About Sports? And so I'd encourage people to check out that chapter. I'll try to just go through a few considerations. In some states, in order to have your child play on the public school sports team, they have to be enrolled as a part-time public school student. One of the downsides to that is that in doing so, the local public school is getting state funding for your child to have them play on the sports team. And so I don't know exactly what the dollars may be, but let's say that it's even 50% of the annual state funding for your child to be a part-time public school student. I think the national average now for public schools is well over $15,000. So they're getting $7,000 to $8,000 a year potentially in revenue for your child. Well, that is probably above what you're paying in your school taxes. So your child's participation in the local public school sports program is costing your neighbors extra tax money. So your neighbors are having to pay money out of their pocket for your child to play public school sports. And again, I have a whole chapter in the Answers for Homeschooling book on why it's not a Christian idea or even a conservative idea for you to force other people to pay for your child's educational opportunities through confiscatory taxation. So that's a consideration. Secondly, and this is my personal viewpoint, which would not be the viewpoint of maybe many, but my view is that whatever you fund grows and whatever you defund shrinks. And as a Christian who believes that Christian children need an exclusively Christian education, I'm not eager to see a growth and expansion of an anti-Christian government school system. So if I, as a Christian parent, am doing something that is growing the government school system and providing more funding for them, I look at that as a bad idea. I want to have revenue pulled away from that system, not pumped into that system. So that's my perspective. So I think the first question that you have to ask is this providing extra revenue for the public school beyond what they would have? Because in Michigan, for example, if my child is not enrolled in the public school, they get zero funding for my child. And that's the way it is in almost every state, that unless your child is enrolled, the local public school gets zero funding. But when you opt in to some sort of additional class, and there are states like Michigan where it's not, we don't allow sports, but we do allow opting into different elective co-op type classes. Mm-hmm. So you could get other things besides that, like music or swimming, horseback riding, art, a lot of those kinds of elective classes you can have paid for by the local public school, kind of a similar thing. So I think it's always an important question to ask, how much additional funding is this providing to the school? So that's number one. Number two, I think, is the social environment. One of the reasons why as Christians we need to be cautious about having our children in anti-Christian peer environments is that the non-Christian peers can really have a very negative influence on our child.
Right.
And the scriptures talk about that. Proverbs 13:20, where it says, whoever walks with wise people will become wise, but a companion of fools will be destroyed. Or in 1 Corinthians 15:33, where it says, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good character. And so when our child is in the public school locker room, some of you who went to a government school will probably remember, what were the conversations like? Mm-hmm. That can be very detrimental. It can be very dangerous for them to be exposed to the kind of really highly sexually charged conversations that happen and just the negative influence. So that's an issue. I think also if you have a daughter that you're wanting to have play public school sports, you need to be aware that in many, many locations, there are going to be biological males that are going to be in the dressing room with your daughter. And you're opting your daughter into those kinds of scenarios and situations. And there are many cases where young females are being sexually assaulted in bathrooms and in locker rooms by biological males because the school facilitates it and encourages it. So that's an issue. Number three, I would say, and this is kind of still tied into the peer issue or the peer influence, is that your child will all of a sudden become, surprise, surprise, friends with the kids on the football team, for example.
Hanging out with, right?
Right. And so now they want to be with them and they want to go to their parties and they want to go to hang out where they hang out. And so increasingly, I've seen this happen many, many times. A homeschool student who starts out just playing public school sports wants to go to public school because there's pressure on him to do so. And that's where his friends are. So he wants to be there. So very often the first step is, oh, my teenager's now playing on the public school sports team. Next thing, we've enrolled him in school because he really wanted to do it. Yeah. And again, the negative influence, then not just of the peers, but of the textbooks and the teachers often can really shipwreck a young person's faith and moral character. So that's a concern. This is maybe a lesser concern, but I've seen this happen. There's also the aspect of our reputation within the community as homeschoolers. A lot of people are biased against homeschooling to begin with. They believe that homeschooling is negative. They believe that homeschoolers are weird. And, there's all the stereotypes, right? They don't get proper socialization, et cetera, et cetera. But some people also have this stereotype that homeschoolers are elitist, like, oh, they think they're better than us. And so they look at homeschoolers with a bit of a disdain because you think your kids are too good to be in our local public school. But then the homeschoolers want their kid on the sports team. And so if your homeschooled child gets picked for the football team and is on the team, somebody else's kid got bumped. Somebody's kid got cut from the team. And so all of the kids who got cut from the football team know that there's a homeschooler on that team. And I've seen it happen where there becomes a resentment, even publicly, that gets brought up in the school board meetings about my kid who goes to this local public school was cut because of the homeschooler. What are the homeschoolers doing to contribute to the well-being of our public school? Nothing. They think their kids are better than ours. They don't put their kids in the classes. They don't participate with the rest of the community in the community activities. They're holed up out there by themselves, being antisocial, thinking they're better, teaching their kids all kinds of weird things. And then they take my kid's place on the football team. I don't think that's right.
Interesting.
And oftentimes there's a push for regulating homeschooling from those kinds of parents and people who are sympathetic to them, because these homeschoolers are taking our resources.
Right.
But what are they giving? How are they contributing? And so, these are a few things that I think we have to consider. So like as I said, our state association has really not pushed for homeschool inclusion. Also in cities, you don't have this so much in rural areas, but in most major cities, there are now, there weren't when I was growing up, but there are homeschool sports teams. So we've had homeschool volleyball and homeschool baseball teams and homeschool football teams. And, we've had basketball is huge. There's actually a national tournament in Springfield, Missouri for homeschool basketball that has, I think, it's like 10,000 people that show up. It's massive. And what happens as soon as a state allows public school sports access, it almost completely kills that entire network of privately funded homeschool sports leagues.
I've seen that.
And they just collapse. So then, although the equal access to public school sports is often pitched as a school choice issue, and we just want to provide more choices for people, when the homeschool league goes away, and your only option is now to play on the public school team, do you have more choices? You really don't.
Right.
You're down now to one choice, which is the government school choice. And so if you start your own privately funded homeschool leagues, then you have more choice. You have the option of having your students, hopefully, with young people who have more like-minded goals and values, with Christian coaches where you can pray before games and, you have more accountability and those kinds of things. So,
Right.
So it also just kills that private homeschool community. And so I am a big fan of private leagues. I feel like, honestly, even community leagues like Little League, that are community run in the summertime for baseball, as opposed to the public school, are better options.
A little more short term too. Would they be short term?
Yeah, there's still a lot of investment. I mean, you still have a long season, but yeah, or church leagues. Having them in those kinds of opportunities, and of course, homeschool leagues are great. So I think that my view is I'm a fan of privatizing everything, pretty much. Other than the police and the military, I think most things can be privatized. And so, privatizing the sports programs gives parents more control over what's happening. And again, within a Christian environment, you just have a lot more reinforcement of your faith and values rather than tearing it down. So I have quite a few thoughts on the sports issue. Those are some of them. Again, I'd encourage you to check out the Answers for Homeschooling, Top 25 Questions Critics Ask book that I've written to get a little bit more insight on the public school sports issue.
That's good. So going on, the next question is related to how to help your homeschool kid not be a weird homeschool kid. And I figured you'd probably be better suited to answer this than I am.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, here's why. I'm like, dress our children in like organic linen Lord Fauntleroy clothing.
Oh, I thought you were saying because I was the weird homeschool kid.
Oh, no.
Yeah, no. So, I do think that there are some homeschool stereotypes. And the thing about stereotypes is that sometimes there's some truth to it. And homeschoolers are a little eccentric sometimes. I have to admit that. Now it's changing, right? Because homeschooling is broadening out, and homeschooling is a much broader pond than it used to be in the 80s and 90s when you and I were being homeschooled. And so I think that homeschooling is much more mainstream and does not fit so many of the stereotypes now as it used to. But there always is kind of that argument of the socially awkward kid, or the kids that are just kind of nerdy or whatever. And again, like, I'll just give a homeschool stereotype that comes to my mind. I speak at a lot of homeschool conferences, and sometimes when I'm at the conference, I have these teens that help you unload.
Right.
And, I have a group of like 13 teenage boys that have just helped me bring my boxes in to help me set up my booth. And I'll immediately ask, anybody here have a pocket knife? And like 26 pocket knives will come out immediately because these homeschool boys, they all have pocket knives,
Good
right?
fort builders.
Yeah, exactly. And so while that's not something that you're allowed to do in the public school, in the homeschool environment, that's something we celebrate. And so, that's just a little quirky thing, but homeschoolers are just a little different in certain ways. And so there are some stereotypes, some generalizations that I think are generally true. What I would say is that overall, though, the accusation that homeschoolers are socially awkward and socially weird is a fallacy and can be proven to be a fallacy by research. Mm-hmm. So again, back to the Answers for Homeschooling book, I have a chapter in here where I talk about socialization. And one of the arguments on the socialization side is that if homeschoolers don't spend lots of time in a classroom with 30 to 40 other students the same age, they won't know how to communicate to others, they won't be socially well-rounded, and therefore, when they grow up and they go out in the real world, they're not going to know how to communicate with others, they won't be positive, contributing citizens in society. Well, there's a study that was done by the National Home Education Research Institute, Dr. Brian Ray, which you can find at NHERI.org, NHERI.org, and it was called Homeschooling Grows Up. And it was a study of 8,000 homeschooled students who had been homeschooled for at least 7 years. So it was the predominance of their school years. They were in a home environment. And it tracked them as adults and compared their social activity as young adults with those who had been enrolled in private schools and government schools. Right. And it found that in all of the ways in which we think about someone being a positive contributing member of society, homeschoolers were actually excelling, and that they were the most positively socially engaged in their community. So they were the most likely to read books. They were the most likely to be aware of news and social events. They were the most likely to vote in elections, the most likely to help political candidates or even to run for office. They were more likely to own their own business than merely be an employee statistically compared to the other group. They were less likely to have any sort of alcohol or drug abuse issues. They were more likely to be involved positively in their church or religious community or organization. They were more likely to volunteer for community service, more likely to donate money to charitable causes, right? So,
lots of things.
So this argument that, well, these weird homeschool kids are going to grow up and be a blight on society was not true. And again, this is peer-reviewed research done by PhD researchers, right? So then they found that the students who were the least positively engaged as adults in society were actually those who graduated from government school. So all of the stereotypes really that people hold to in terms of biases against homeschool, the research refutes almost all of it. Which is, again, why I wrote the Answers for Homeschooling book, so that families could really have documented evidence to support and defend their choice for home education. I'll say this, though. I think sometimes there's this fallacy that in logic is stated this way, that correlation does not equal causation. Correlation does not equal causation. So simply because we find that two things are connected, we can't always infer what caused the connection. Right. So let's say that you do find that odd homeschooler who's maybe a social introvert or maybe a little strange in their behavior or just awkward in some way. Let's say that you find that student and that they're homeschooled and that they're a little weird. Let's put it that way. Okay, there's correlation. They're homeschooled, and they're a little odd. Is there causation? And that's where I think the fallacy comes in. Right. That homeschooling caused this odd behavior. And I think it's a fallacy. And so here's a couple reasons why. First of all, you will find odd people in any sector of life. You can go into any church and find someone who's odd. And so if you do that and you say, you know what, I went to a Southern Baptist church one time and boy, there was a teenager there who was really weird. And so them Southern Baptists are, being a Southern Baptist causes your teenager to be weird, right? Well, no, it's not necessarily a causal connection there. Maybe a correlation, but not a causation. And then you can find that anywhere. You could find someone who is raised on a farm and they're a little odd. And so you say farming causes someone to be socially awkward. Well, here's my thesis. I think there are people who are introverts and there are people who are maybe just a little different. And they would be that way no matter what context you put them into. And honestly, not to throw rocks in that direction, but some of the oddest people that I've ever met in my life went to public school, right? Did public school make them weird? I don't think so. I think there are some people who are just socially awkward. And those people will be socially awkward no matter where you put them. So I think we have to kind of step back and say, yeah, there are some homeschoolers who are a little different. But did homeschooling make them that way? I would say no. And I'm going to go farther than that. I'm going to go one step beyond that and say, I actually think that the correlation may be tighter than what we think from the standpoint that, let's say you have a student in the public schools and they have a learning difficulty. Or they have some kind of autism, or they have something about them that's just not average. Students who are not average don't do well in the public school system because the public school system is one of the only institutions in the world that actually aims for average. That's what the standardized test does. It seeks to create a bell curve, and we want the students right there in the bell curve. So the 20% of the gifted students, they don't fit in. The 20% who struggle, you got 40% of the students on the margins who struggle and because they are lagging behind or they're way ahead. And it's the 60% in the middle. It's the average students that the public school is built for. And that it functions best for those 60%. They truly aim for average. But if you're a marginalized student where you're a genius, like an Einstein. Einstein was kind of strange. He really was. He was eccentric, and we could probably have blamed that on homeschooling, right? If somebody found out Einstein's a homeschooler, they'd be like, well, see, that's what happens. You turn out a little weird. But the fact is, sometimes a student who is wired a little different is in a public school and they're not thriving. They're not doing well. And they're getting bullied, they're getting picked on, and kids make fun of them. And so the parent says, look, for my own child's safety and their well-being, I need to take them out of this environment. I need to make sure that they are protected. And so they start homeschooling them. Well, now all of a sudden, in society's mind, they're weird because they're homeschooled. But they were actually homeschooled because they didn't fit in with the average kids. And in defense of being a little different, I really believe that those things that make a child different and eccentric are often their superpower.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, certainly they can have negative impacts in terms of maybe they don't relate as well socially, or they have less verbal skills, or whatever it is. They're painfully shy, or whatever the issue is. But you will usually find that if they are allowed to not be crushed in terms of their spirit, and that they still recognize that they have worth and value, and they still have some belief that they can learn, and they don't just get smashed by the system, if you will, that when they grow up, they can often have a superpower that makes them exceptional at the narrow slice that God hardwired them to be and do. And I may be thinking of myself a little bit in that way. I grew up being dyslexic. I was ADHD, just kind of a bouncing off the walls kind of kid. And I did not fit into an institutional school environment. And it didn't work for me at all. And so it would have been very easy for people to look at me and say, oh, look, this kid's weird. He's terrible at school. His academics are pathetic. Socially, he's so hyper, and he can't read because I didn't learn to read till I was 11. Those kinds of things. And yet, all of those detriments and those deficits have kind of, as an adult, have kind of become the things that make me successful in what I do today. Which is odd. But I think that's how God works. And so our goal is not to necessarily discount oddness and to disparage it, but to rather say God must have a special plan for this child, and to learn how to hone it and to channel it into something productive.
Provide a safe place for it to grow and
Sure.
to be leveled out as necessary. For myself,
Correct.
I was a very, very shy young person, very introverted, and I was enrolled in a preschool, so very young, 5 years old, 4 years old. And the way that I reacted to that classroom environment with teachers telling me what to do and trying to draw me out and like scold me a little bit, like you need to be more outgoing, was to just withdraw more. And so when my parents brought me home and began homeschooling at age 5, again, very young, they provided the safe place where then I felt free to then finally grow out of some of those tendencies. So it was kind of like, instead of being corralled into, you have to go through this particular mode, you have to become this particular person, being at home really helped me thrive. And I would say even as a young person, it wasn't just at age 5, but as a young person, I needed a little more quiet space, a little more sheltered home life to be able to grow into the person I've become. So
Yeah. So I think that in terms of our families, we have responsibility in parenting that we need to disciple our children, and we need to work on them in terms of those issues where they have struggles.
Right.
If they are being socially awkward, we need to help them to overcome it. But thank God they're not in an environment where they're being bullied,
Yes.
where they're being threatened, where their soul is just being squashed by the tyranny of an oppression of the peer group, right? That they have a loving context, a loving environment where we can help them to work through some of those things. And so we're not just defending that you leave your child stuck in areas that won't be helpful for them later in life. But again, to learn how to channel those things. So like for you, you're a great listener. Being an introvert made you a good listener.
Right.
And being an extrovert made me a good talker. And so these are things that have helped us, I think, in our life. And we want to, as parents, help our children to get through those difficult aspects of their personality in a safe and loving environment.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us again for one of our podcast episodes. We hope that you'll tell friends about it. And hope that you will visit us at our website, which is familyrenewal.org. We have a lot of free parenting information on that. Maybe come hear us speak at a conference in your area. And we look forward to joining you next time. Until then, God bless.
Goodbye.
This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.